The evening air was thick with laughter and chatter, the soft glow of string lights casting warm shadows over the garden. I stood near the buffet, holding my glass of wine, surveying the crowd. Everyone seemed so carefree, so perfect in their smiles, and yet I couldn't help but notice him, my husband, leaning against the far wall, calm and collected, as though he knew exactly what was coming. We had been married for 4 years, and in those years, I had learned a few things about him. His patience was endless, his confidence unshakable, and his pride, well, perhaps a little too deep for comfort. Tonight, I felt a strange mix of admiration and mischief bubbling within me. Surrounded by our friends and colleagues, the opportunity presented itself like a perfect storm. I felt my heart race, a flutter of excitement mingled with a subtle thrill. This was my moment, my chance to shine, to tease him just enough to make everyone laugh. I had no idea, though, that what I considered harmless fun might awaken something far more calculated than I could imagine. As music drifted from the speakers and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the aroma of dinner, I rehearsed my words silently, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. The world seemed to narrow, focusing solely on him and me. My laughter, playful yet sharp, hovered on the edge of my lips. A single misstep, a poorly timed joke, could change the night, and perhaps even us forever. I didn't know then that by the time the next 3 days passed, everything I thought I understood about my husband and myself would be completely overturned. The music swelled as laughter echoed across the garden, a perfect backdrop for the small drama I was about to create. I leaned slightly toward a cluster of friends, my eyes flicking toward him, my husband, who stood perfectly still, exuding calm. There was something intoxicating about the way he carried himself, an air of unshakable confidence that both frustrated and fascinated me. Tonight, I decided it was time to push just a little. As I approached him, my voice light and teasing, I let a playful smirk curl across my lips. "Oh, everyone, look at him!" I exclaimed, loudly enough for nearby friends to hear. The man who claims he's always so perfect, yet still can't pour a single glass of wine without spilling it. Laughter rippled around us, and I felt a flush of satisfaction. The spotlight was mine. He didn't flinch. His eyes, dark and steady, met mine with an almost imperceptible smile, as if he already knew the storm I was stirring. I laughed, a little louder this time, letting the words land with precision. "Honestly," I continued, "sometimes I wonder why I even married someone who thinks folding napkins is a sign of intelligence." Friends chuckled, and a few nudged me, encouraging performance. My heart raced, both from the thrill of attention and from the subtle tension building between us. His silence unnerved me slightly, but I quickly brushed it off. Surely, this was just harmless fun. Then, for a brief moment, I saw a flicker, a tiny shadow of something deeper, in his gaze. A hint of amusement, yes, but also a glimmer of calculation. I laughed again, louder, dismissing the notion that he might already be plotting some quiet, meticulous response. As the night wore on, my teasing escalated, each word sharper, each jab more pointed. The more I mocked, the more the crowd laughed, and the more I felt a heady sense of power. Yet beneath the applause and giggles, a strange tension hummed in the air, a quiet undercurrent that whispered of consequences yet unseen. By the time I finally stepped back, savoring the attention, I had no idea that those 3 little days ahead would transform a playful joke into a lesson I would never forget. The evening had been mine, but the next act was his, and it was already in motion. The morning sun spilled to the curtains, painting the room in soft, golden light. I stirred awake, a faint smile lingering on my lips as I replayed last night's party in my mind. The laughter, the applause, the way everyone had looked at me. It had been perfect. I felt a quiet thrill at how effortlessly I had stolen the spotlight. And yet, as I glanced across the room at my husband, something tugged at the edge of my consciousness. He sat at the breakfast table, calm as ever, sipping his coffee with that same inscrutable expression he always wore. Not a word about last night, not a hint of irritation. At first, I felt relieved, even smug. Surely, he had no hard feelings. After all, it had all been in good fun. But there was a subtle tension in the air, an invisible line drawn between us that hadn't existed before. I tried to dismiss it, scrolling through my phone, sharing snippets of the party with friends, laughing at the comments they left. But every time I looked up, I caught him watching me, quietly, deliberately, with that unyielding patience I had come to know too well. His gaze wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something colder, sharper, like a still pond hiding a current beneath. Throughout the day, I noticed small things, a folded napkin perfectly placed where I had left it crumpled, a subtle rearrangement of my belongings, a glance that lingered just a second too long. I laughed it off each time, telling myself I was imagining things. Yet, despite the laughter and the normalcy of routine, a tiny seed of unease had been planted. Something told me that the calm I saw in him wasn't surrender. It was the quiet before a storm. And I had a growing suspicion that the playful victory I had felt at the party might not last for long. By evening, that seed of doubt had grown roots. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something clever, deliberate, and entirely unexpected. The second day after the party began with an unsettling quiet. I woke to the soften of the city outside, expecting life to feel normal, but something was different. My husband moved around the apartment with his usual composure, yet there was a precision in his actions that set my nerves on edge. Every cup, every plate, every little item I left out seemed to have found a new, meticulously organized spot. At breakfast, I made a casual comment about last night, expecting a laugh or a playful eye roll, but he only smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You really enjoyed yourself yesterday, didn't you?" he said softly, almost teasingly. I nodded, brushing off the subtle warning in his tone. Surely he was just being playful. But as the day unfolded, the signs became harder to ignore. I reached for my favorite mug, and it had been replaced with one slightly smaller, slightly crooked. My keys were not where I had left them. Even the throw pillow I always plopped onto the couch had been turned at an odd angle. It was almost imperceptible, but each minor shift created a gnawing sense of unease. I began to notice his glances, brief and calculated, catching me off guard as if he were observing not just my actions, but my reactions to them. I laughed nervously when a friend called, joking about the mystery of the moving objects at home, but deep down, a creeping tension lodged itself in my chest. By evening, small incidents escalated in peculiarity. A note appeared on my desk. "Remember, play is fun until it's your turn." The handwriting was unmistakable. My stomach twisted in equal parts dread and admiration. He wasn't angry. He was plotting carefully, brilliantly. And I realized with a sinking heart that his revenge wouldn't be hasty or crude. It would be deliberate, creative, and entirely unforgettable. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I could almost hear the faint ticking of a clock counting down to the moment when my playful triumph would come crashing down. The storm had not yet arrived, but its presence was undeniable, and I knew that by the end of the third day, nothing would ever feel the same again. While I went about my day, blissfully unaware of the subtle shifts around me, my husband retreated into quiet contemplation. To an outsider, he seemed unchanged, calm, patient, almost ordinary, but beneath that composed exterior, a careful plan was taking shape. He wasn't impulsive. He never was. Every reaction was calculated with precision. Each detail weighed against the impact it would have on me. He reviewed the events of the previous night in his mind, replaying my laughter, the exaggerated gestures, the way I had basked in the attention of friends. It wasn't humiliation he sought. He had no desire to hurt me, but a lesson, delivered with both cleverness and subtlety, was necessary. He wanted me to feel the same mix of surprise, admiration, and respect that I had unknowingly demanded of him. Notes were drafted in his mind, scenarios imagined and discarded, each more ingenious than the last. He studied the rhythm of my day, identifying moments where my guard would be down, where the smallest shift could make the largest impact. His strategy was simple in concept but sophisticated in execution, patience, timing, and precision. Every glance he cast my way now carried an extra layer of meaning. To me, it seemed casual, almost playful. But in reality, it was a silent countdown, a prelude to the moment when his plan would unfold. I could not yet see it, but the careful threads of his scheme were weaving together, and by the time he struck, the result would be impossible to ignore. In the quiet of that afternoon, I remained blissfully unaware that my playful victory had already set the stage for an unforgettable reversal. He was ready, and the clock was ticking. The game had changed, and I was about to discover just how clever and patient he truly was. The third day began with a quiet intensity that I couldn't quite name. I awoke feeling rested, yet subtle unease clung to me like a shadow. There were no overt signs of retaliation, no notes, no rearranged belongings, nothing that seemed out of place. I convinced myself that perhaps the tension I'd felt yesterday had been imagined, a product of my own overthinking. But as the morning passed, small details began to catch my attention. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification I didn't remember setting. A meeting with friends at a local cafe later that afternoon. Curious, I called one of them. "Oh," they said casually, "we just thought we'd all catch up." Nothing serious. Yet their tone carried an odd hesitation. My pulse quickened. By midday, I began to notice other subtle signs. My husband moved around the apartment with unusual focus, tidying spaces I hadn't even noticed. Each glance he cast in my direction was deliberate, calm, and somehow loaded with meaning. The sense of unease that had started yesterday now grew into a creeping anticipation. Something was coming. Finally, the afternoon arrived. We walked to the cafe. Friends chatting lightly, oblivious of the tension that crackled between my husband and me. I tried to remain composed, but a knot of nervous excitement had formed in my stomach. Something told me he was about to turn the tables, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see how. We reached the cafe, and as we entered, I noticed a small crowd gathered near our usual table. Confused, I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. Carefully arranged on the table were photos, messages, and playful reminders from the party the night before. My exaggerated gestures, my laughter, my jabs at him, but cleverly interwoven were subtle mistakes that made it seem as though I had completely misjudged the situation, overstepping more than I realized. Then he smiled, that calm, knowing smile. "I thought you might like a little reminder," he said, his tone light but deliberate. As I scanned the display, a wave of embarrassment and awe washed over me. It was perfect, clever, calculated, and utterly unforgettable. Friend began to chuckle, and I realized that I had walked right into his game, completely outsmarted. He hadn't humiliated me cruelly. He had orchestrated a playful, yet devastatingly effective lesson. Every detail, every small touch of planning demonstrated just how well he knew me. My laughter caught in my throat as the weight of cleverness sank in. I had thought I was the one in control, but in truth, the game had shifted entirely in his favor. By the time we left the cafe, my pride had been tempered, my respect for him deepened. The lesson was clear. Patience, intelligence, and timing were far more powerful than a moment's playful arrogance. That day, I learned just how capable my husband was, and that underestimating him had been my greatest mistake. The evening settled over the city like a calm after a storm, but inside me, a newfound awareness hummed. The playful joke I had delivered had sparked a brilliant counter, one I would never forget, and I knew in my heart that the dynamic between us had shifted, not broken, but transformed into something deeper, wiser, and infinitely more thrilling. The walk home was quiet, the city lights flickering softly against the evening sky. I felt a strange mixture of embarrassment, awe, and something I couldn't quite name, admiration. My mind replayed every detail of the cafe, every clever touch of his plan, every subtle jab that had left me momentarily speechless. I had walked in confident and playful, certain of my victory, and yet now I felt as though I had been unmasked before the world. At home, the tension lingered like a soft hum, and I avoided his gaze for a moment, unsure of how to meet it. When I finally looked, he was there, calm, collected, that quiet smile still playing on his lips. Not a hint of malice, only the satisfaction of a job well done. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The evidence of his cleverness was everywhere, and it was enough. Friends and family began to call and message, asking if I was okay, teasing me about the display at the cafe. Each message sent a fresh wave of both embarrassment and amusement through me. Their laughter mirrored my husband's silent, knowing smile, and I realized that while I had intended to entertain, he had entertained and outsmarted everyone. Sitting alone later, I reflected on my own pride, on the fleeting thrill of being the center of attention, and on how easily I had underestimated him. The playful arrogance that fueled my teasing now seemed almost naive. And yet, a part of me couldn't help but marvel at his patience, his intelligence, and the creativity he had brought to such a simple, personal lesson. By the time I went to bed, a sense of clarity had settled over me. The lesson was not just about a joke or a moment of public teasing. It was about respect, awareness, and the quiet strength that comes from patience and cleverness. My husband had reminded me, without cruelty or anger, that even in play, he was never to be underestimated. That night, I drifted to sleep with a mixture of humility and awe, knowing that the next days, weeks, and months would carry the memory of his brilliant, unforgettable lesson. And somewhere deep inside, I found a renewed sense of admiration for the man I had married. Clever, patient, and utterly irreplaceable. The days following the cafe incident were quieter, but the echoes of that afternoon lingered in my mind. I found myself replaying every detail over and over, analyzing his cleverness, his timing, the way he had orchestrated everything without a hint of malice. It was impossible not to feel a mixture of humility and admiration. For the first time in a long while, I truly saw him, not just as my husband, but as a man whose patience, intelligence, and creativity demanded respect. Even in our everyday life, subtle reminders of the incident appeared. A folded napkin, a perfectly placed coffee cup, a playful smirk when I least expected it. Each one a gentle nudge, a whisper of the lesson he had taught me. I realized that this wasn't about humiliation or winning. It was about understanding the balance in our relationship, about recognizing that pride and arrogance, even in jest, could be met with quiet, brilliant retaliation. I began to reflect on my own behavior, my tendency to seek attention, to assert control, to assume victory too quickly. It was a humbling experience, but not one that left me defeated. Instead, it opened my eyes to the depth of our connection, the playfulness tempered with respect, the subtle intelligence that underpinned our bond. I had learned something invaluable, not just about him, but about myself. When we spoke that evening, our conversation carried a new tone. Laughter returned, softer and wiser, tinged with the memory of the lesson. I teased him gently, aware now that every word might be met with clever counterplay, and he responded in kind. The dynamic between us had shifted, but it had not broken. Instead, it had matured, deepened, and become richer. By the end of the week, the memory of the party and the cafe incident had settled into something like legend between us, a story we would recount with laughter, pride, and a hint of awe. I had been humbled, surprised, and utterly captivated by his ingenuity. And in that, I found not only renewed love, but a sense of playful balance that promised countless moments of clever banter, mutual respect, and shared joy in the years to come. In learning to respect his quiet strength and brilliance, I had discovered a deeper connection, one built not on dominance or victory, but on understanding, admiration, and love. That week taught me a lesson I will never forget. Pride and playfulness can be fun, but cleverness and patience hold far greater power. My husband's quiet, calculated response reminded me that true strength often lies in subtlety, not in loud gestures or fleeting victories. In learning to respect his intelligence, I discovered a deeper bond between us, one built on mutual admiration, playful understanding, and love. Sometimes the most unforgettable lessons arrive not with anger, but with wit, patience, and a touch of clever revenge.